evening and welcome to the Thursday, May 23rd meeting of the Northampton School Committee. I'm Mayor David Narkowitz, the chair, and I will ask the clerk to call the roll of the school committee.
Mayor David Narkowitz.
Present.
Here, Ms. Rebecca Busansky.
Present.
Ms. Laura Fallon.
Present.
Ms. Ann Hennessy.
Present.
Mr. Lonnie Kaufman.
Present.
Mr. Howard Moore.
Here.
Ms. Susan Voss.
Present.
Your Honor, you have a form.
Thank you. Just want to let the public know that this meeting is being audio and visual recorded by NCTV. And for those wondering why we're in a different location, we had a double booking this evening. The Board of Health had a public meeting that it had posted and had to post in the newspaper, and there was a glitch with the schedule. So we slid over next door and they're in the community room. I also just need to let you know that Coach Zuhowski is running late. East Hampton baseball is still playing, so they're running a little bit late, and so he's going to get here as soon as their game is over. Ms. Burnham had I guess a death in the family or a death of a friend, so she's unable to be here this evening. So, okay, so we'll move on to the public comment period, and I will just ask for the sign-up sheet, if it's possible. Sorry, I should have. I'll just ask folks to come to the podium and just let us know who you are, and if you could just try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, and I'll just keep a recording, a timer on it so that we can let people know that they have their equal time. So the first person who signed up to speak is Thea Hardig.
I'm Thea Hardig. I'm a resident of Northampton. I live on 23 Washington Avenue. I'm also the Northampton High School PTO president, and I just have a few comments. For a long time, our teachers have been seriously underpaid. They work so hard, and yet they are underpaid. They've been generous to us, and yet not adequately compensated. It's time for us to not only be fair to our teachers, but generous to them. We need to right a wrong. Please respect our teachers and their very hard work by giving them what they ask for in wages. And as we right this wrong, let's not ask for anything in return. Our teachers have already worked many, many hours for free. Let's not ask them to give us anything in return except for what they are already giving. This is not a time for us to be asking to get something extra in return. The teachers already gave extra and not being fairly paid for years. Now is the time for us to give, to correct a wrong, to make better, to heal and support and value these excellent, caring, brilliant, and dedicated teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person who signed up is Angela Agresto.
Angela Agresto, 41 Corselli Street. I'm here to express my concern over what looks and feels like an attitude that physical violence between middle schoolers is normal and has led to a culture of casual violence at JFK Middle School. In 1 week, my child was injured twice during school hours. On that Monday, my child was punched in the head by a student he didn't know and sustained a concussion. And then on Thursday, he was tackled by a friend and sustained a leg injury. That required the use of crutches and prohibited his participation in physical activities for a number of weeks. I would suggest that although the school has engaged with the PBIS program, that will ultimately have little long-term success. The change is being directed at the students, but it appears to me that the effective real change attention needs to be paid from the top down. The students are through that school in 3 years or fewer. The administration of that building appears to be long-term, and that's where the change needs to occur. Let me share a small piece of experience with NPS administration that has brought me here tonight. Although the first incident of injury to my child was investigated, and that only after we sent in a bullying report form, the second incident was not. At the conclusion of the investigation, one of the questions that seemed to be important to the administration was how many times my child was hit in the head and not how or why it happened. In the end, since it was deemed to be not bullying, it really didn't seem to matter. For the record, my child reported 3 hits to the head. The child that hitting him reported 1. The school nurse noted 2 lumps on my child's head, and yet the teacher charged with supervising the child who did the hitting reported 0. The second incident week wasn't investigated because my child and the one who jumped him are friends, and that was deemed horseplay and therefore normal behavior, although it certainly wasn't acceptable in elementary school. In fact, not only was it not investigated, but we were never contacted by anyone from the administration beyond the initial call from the school nurse that our child couldn't walk. So although my child had left the school in a wheelchair, the administration did nothing. This is in direct contradiction to the JFK Code of Conduct, which prohibits roughhousing, as noted on the Code of Conduct grid on page 20. This is detrimental to both students. The administration is missing an opportunity to suss out whether this was truly fair, friendly play, disguised bullying, or to educate and guide the children in their care. They're missing an opportunity to demonstrate that kindness and caring are important and that physical violence is unacceptable even between friends. They're missing an opportunity to discuss appropriate behavior, consent, and take responsibility for one's actions. Any evidence I have is personal or anecdotal from other parents. However, enough first-person stories add up to a believable and concerning trend worth the attention of the Office of Superintendent and the school committee. It's certainly worth assessment and change for the safety of our district students. The administration of JFK Building have responsibility to provide support for their teachers and staff, be teammates and problem solving with parents and guardians, and role models for students in their care. I witnessed opportunities where the administration could have chosen to model community building and being accountable, safe, and kind, and chose instead to pass those by. The JFK Code of Conduct states that all have the right to expect a safe, secure school environment. My son did not get that experience and felt that nobody seemed to care. In the end, we can't disagree.
Thank you very much. The next person signed up is Andrea Agito.
Good evening. My name is Andrea Agito, and I am the Unit A Chapter Coordinator for the Northampton Association of School Employees. You may notice an absence of our employees tonight. Our employees aren't here because you haven't been listening. You haven't. I would like to say that it doesn't imply that we are giving up, and in fact, our resolve is stronger than ever. Our presence at these meetings and all the extra activities of our staff that our staff participate in hasn't made any difference to this committee. And it hasn't made any difference to the leadership of our city and our district. It hasn't made any difference in the way you are treating us, and maybe the absence that we're feeling tonight and across the city in our schools will bring you to a fair contract offer. I would like to say for 2 months, we have been begging you to listen to us. You have turned your back on us, but the community is listening. Parents and community members are listening. They are standing with us before and after school. They are writing letters and making calls. But still, you've abandoned us. You have heard hours of testimony, received hundreds of letters, and still you won't bargain with us. Mayor, you said you wouldn't put an override on the backs of your teachers, but actually, you are proposing putting one on the ballot in this November, almost 2 years before there is a projected deficit. You originally thought that you would need another override in 2017, but because of increased revenue and savings from health insurance, which in fact our union made happen, we didn't see that deficit in 2017. So what makes you think the deficit will actually happen in 2022? If you really don't know, and you really don't want to put it on our backs, then why are you proposing putting it on the ballot about 1.5 years before there's a projected deficit? When there is a deficit in our city, we will all stand together for that override, just like we did in 2009, just like we did in 2013. Even though in those years, 2009 and 2013, our staff still didn't get wage increases that equaled the cost of living. So we fought, we phone banked, we petitioned our city and our community to help us and to vote to raise their taxes, and yet we were still left. We were still left behind, alone, with nothing. So I ask, why are we having this premature vote for an override in November? And why won't this committee bargain a fair contract with our staff? Thank you.
So that was the list that had signed up. I know, Ms. Biggs, you came in late, so you can certainly speak.
I'm putting my timer on so I don't go over. So don't start it yet, Mayor.
I will not.
Thank you. Okay, I'm ready. Susan Biggs. I teach chemistry at the high school. I live in Florence, behind Ryan Road. And I've been here twice speaking before the last two meetings, and I've been at City Council a couple times, and I've been very calm. I don't feel calm. And I don't usually get upset. I was really upset standing outside the high school this afternoon. I got in the median and I talked to my colleagues and said, this is nuts that we're out here when I need to be inside the building with kids who want extra help. And I just can't imagine what's going to happen in September when I get fresh kids in AP chemistry and kids in regular and honors chemistry who need and want extra help. And you could say to me right now, just get back in. And I get that. We've been in for years, myself for 19, going on 20. And I won't say for free. I make a salary, but I haven't paid attention for years. I live pretty frugally, and I've had enough money. But this whole, and I've been on a couple negotiation committees, and never quite understood why they ran the way they did. But this has really made me look. So I did look at my last three, not this past year, but I'm going to tell you the year before, my raise was $60. 60. That's less than 4 cents an hour. That's ridiculous. For 13 years, I've been only on a cost of living. Again, I'm not destitute. I get that. But it's crazy. And thank you for your service, and I love that you've come up and you posted on the web, even though we weren't meant to post on the web, that we're up 14+% for the teachers this year. So what's wrong with us? Why are we doing this work to rule? Yet, honestly, to make up for my 2.9 for the previous years, and which is less than 1%, the previous 3 years, which is less than 1% a year. And I know we can't close the gap with our neighboring schools in one cycle, but we're not coming close. I feel like you're comparing the end of our 3-year contract with last year's Ludlow contract. Wait, I'm waiting because I got friends over there that are going to show me their schedule. You need to be comparing it to theirs 3 years from now. It's not closing. The gap's not closing. And it's just really sad to me what next September, it's sad now, and what next September is going to feel like when I ask kids to have a growth mindset, and you can get this. Because half of what I do in chemistry is coach kids to know that they can do the hard work, that they can think hard, process hard, analyze, and I can't say to them, and I can help you with extra. You can redo that quiz. You can and you can come in for the extra help that you need. And I don't know what it's going to feel like when I can't say that. And you could say go back in, but we have no other recourse but to go home at night and pray that you'll throw our way a little more than 2%. It's very sad to me.
Is there anyone else who wishes this?
Hi. My name is Samantha Ginsburg. I'm speaking on a separate subject today. While I do support everything my honors chem teacher Susan Biggs just said. Hi, my name is Samantha Ginsburg. I'm currently the vice president of the Key Club as well as the co-secretary of the junior class. I'm a member of the National Honor Society as well as a 3-season student athlete. I'm here before you by no means fully prepared. However, in the past 3 days, it has come to the attention of the student body that there is a serious talk of having a late start to the school day. While this may be a good idea and possibly beneficial to the Northampton Public Schools as a whole, for the upcoming year, the high school students have made commitments for internships, work studies, and other after-school activities. Therefore, changing the start time of school will negatively affect a large portion of our student body. This raises high levels of concern. If a decision like this is to be made with no early communication to parents and the student body, we can't plan ahead. We are told to plan as if nothing will happen, even though changing internship or job opportunity times with little advance notice is not only unprofessional, but will be very hard to rewrite in each day. I ask that this begins a dialogue between the students and the school committee by working to change, and the school committee, and we will work together to change things on our behalf. Having no information has allowed me to plan my internship to start at 2:15 this fall. If school timing is pushed back 1/2 hour, this will be a 2:45 start time, and I will be unable to arrive at my job at a typical 4:30 start time. This is why I'm asking you to postpone any plan of moving on this and later start time for the next year. I urge you to try and have a better line of communication with the student body and help us practice integrity, responsibility, and commitment. Help us succeed and listen to us and our opinions when making decisions which will affect us directly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Okay. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in public comment? Okay, hearing none, we will,
I'm sorry.
no problem. We'll move on to announcements. Are there any announcements? Yes, Ms. Fallon.
I just wanted to let everyone know that the Pioneer Valley Chinese Immersion Charter School in Hadley is appealing the Education Commissioner's denial of their most recent expansion request. The Board of Education will hear this appeal and decide whether or not to overrule the Commissioner's decision at their meeting on June 25th. The board is taking input until June 12th at boe@doe.mass.edu. Our committee won't be meeting again before that feedback is due, so we won't be able to vote on a statement to send, but I would urge the community and school committee members to send letters against this expansion request.
Can you repeat the date again?
So June 12th is the deadline for input, and the meeting is on June 25th.
Are there other announcements from the school committee? Let's see. So we have a consent agenda tonight that it consists of the approval of the minutes of April 11th, 2019. There are several field trips on here, but they're actually going to the far-off land of Florence, so they don't actually need to be, we don't need to vote on them. They were put on here inadvertently. They're not out of state, so we don't need to take a vote on those. And then budget transfers. We don't have any budget transfers. So effectively, I'm asking you to approve the minutes of April 11th, 2019. That's part of the consent agenda. Mr. Moore.
I think I need to pull the minutes out of the consent agenda.
You need to pull the what?
Minutes out of the consent agenda,
Okay.
because I have an amendment to make too.
Okay, perfect. So I would ask you to vote on the consent agenda, but there's not really anything left. So the consent agenda is now empty. So we'll move on. Would you like to make a, just make a motion to put it on? Someone make a motion to put the minutes on the floor.
I'll move to approve the April 11th, 2019 school committee minutes.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, Mr. Moore, do you have a?
And I'd like to offer an amendment. It's on the Schoolology vote. I voted no.
He did.
Okay. So we'd like to correct the record to show that. It's not really an amendment, you're just making a correction to the vote tally. So the minutes will be changed to show that you voted no. Any other questions or changes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes of April 11th, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Next, we have a series of reports and recommendations. The first being a report on the results of the elementary 30-minute delay survey. And Dr. Provost is going to the podium.
I wonder if it would be okay to take these out of order because I see that Annie has put up the second item first.
We certainly
That's the
can.
only one I have for the projector. But they do have it in the
Okay, so can I just reference the packet then? Have that with me.
Can we connect? Do you want? Yeah.
Connect one of our laptops instead.
Would you like to connect it?
I can try.
I think I could do it pretty easily.
Okay.
Well, is the agenda on, can you access it on that computer, the agenda?
I would have to switch it from the open source PDF.
Okay.
Do you have an HDMI connection?
She doesn't. We have the, the little screw-in 5-port
It's
one. It's the old school
the
one.
VGA.
Yeah, VGA, yeah.
Do you have the email on here?
I have the email. I don't get the email.
Everything?
It worked for the students.
So maybe your iPad might
To that, I
work.
can connect to that.
Yeah. What's that?
She's got it on. She's got it on a thumb drive.
But not on an iPad, you can't.
Oh, no, you can do that.
Oh, you could do it from there. Okay, you've got an adapter.
You can put a thumb drive
Wow.
in here too.
Put a thumb drive in here.
That's what she's gonna do.
Put the thumb drive directly in there. Okay.
No, do you have it on the thumb drive though, or you're saying
No,
copy
she's
it?
saying put it on the thumb drive.
Oh, sorry, Cammie, I can do that. I didn't understand.
Puts it on the thumb drive, we can put the thumb
Yeah.
drive in there.
Believe it or not, I,
Who's on first?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Hang on, you just, the length of documents.
You've got a lot of attachments there. Holy cow. All right, we're just, with the public's patience, we're just going to be transferring a file over.
Invite them up. There are thousands of people watching TV. There are thousands of people watching TV.
Yes. Okay, wow, that's cool.
It's part of the job.
Yeah, you have to have lots of, yeah.
Barely keeping up with it all, but.
We got new Mac like
I'm not.
we have USB-C. It's unless you carry it. No. It was one of the first today. It's been very close. Got brand new keyboard. Yeah. It's gotten better. The first edition, the second edition.
All right.
We got it. Okay. So we'll do late start time.
And battery doesn't.
Okay, so this is follow-up to directive that I received from the school committee, I believe about 2 months ago, to look into a proposal to accomplish a late start time at the high school by moving all schools back 30 minutes. As you'll recall from the communication that night, it's the plan at this point that I think is probably the most viable. It is a plan that comes at essentially no cost to the district. The only real increased cost, doing a 30-minute across the board bump, is that we won't be able to sync up with the release time of other schools, which will cause our special education transportation from out-of-district placements to go up slightly. But as compared to other late time starts, proposals that have been brought forward, including my own late start time proposal, this is certainly much lower cost. So at that time, The request was for the elementary school councils to survey their parents on the acceptability of a late start, because we had hypothesized that the greatest impact would be for elementary parents dropping off students. And it also had some information that in the past, when similar ideas had been floated, they basically were not ultimately voted for because they were not acceptable to the elementary parents. So I worked with the school councils to get a survey out to all the elementary parents. It was very simple. Basically just asked two questions. First, if we moved back to a 9:20 starting time, would that be acceptable to you? And so I can show you the results of that next. There you go. And so you see each of the individual schools, and then the orange bar shows all schools combined. So you can see that the later start time is favorable to elementary parents by a ratio of about 2 to 1 across the board, with no real significant variance at any of the individual schools.
What was the response rate overall?
So we have about 1,000 students in elementary schools. I'm not exactly sure how many families that represents, but I would say that, you know, it's probably less than half of the families, even accounting for multiple students in a household. And then the second question we asked is, if before school childcare were provided a reasonable cost, including tuition waiver for students eligible for free and reduced lunch, then would it be acceptable? And you can see in that case, the response rate goes up to about 3 to 1 in favor of going to a later start time. The only other two pieces I can add is that we did get 2 pieces of narrative response in addition to parents completing the survey. One was from a member of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council, saying that a late start time would have a significantly differential effect for low-income families and for families of students with disabilities, and that it would be more negative for them than it would be for middle-income families or families of typical peers. And there was a research packet that was included with that response. And then we did get another narrative response from a parent saying, basically, in the opposite range. It wasn't a response that was accompanied by research, but someone wanting to go on record saying, I don't want to just say yes, but I want to explain to you that I think this is a good idea and you should move forward with it. So those are the results I have to report on what the elementary school councils were able to find from their parents.
Could we, since she's still here, just address Ms. Ginsburg's concerns about the implementation timeline for this? There was no intention of implementing a change in the start time for this coming academic year, correct?
We never discussed timeline. I do think that if it's something the school committee felt strongly about, we would have to get started very quickly, but I think it would be possible to do next year. Yes.
I know we also asked to talk to the school, find out what the school councils at all the elementary, middle, and high school thought. Do we have any feedback from that beyond this?
This is the feedback. I mean,
This is a survey with elementary school parents, but just I mean, since the school council has teachers, parents, the principal. I thought
So the school councils didn't submit like a minority report or a majority report.
Okay.
They just said, we want to get the feedback from our parents and share that with you.
Okay, and the high school council?
The school committee asked me to survey the elementary parents only, so that's what we received. My suggestion would be, if we want to continue to move forward, the next step would be to see if this is something that would be acceptable at middle and high school as well, because they would also be impacted. As I shared with you after my boat ride with Ms. Ginsburg, I was kind of shocked to hear that there might be some students at the high school who might not want this because as long as I've been here, the goal has been to try to get a later start time for high school students because it was felt that that was a strong community desire. But, you know, just as we surveyed elementary parents kind of going into it thinking that there's no way they would accept a 9:20 start time and found out that actually they probably are okay with it, maybe we should ask the high school students if they, and families if they want to go to a late start time, maybe we'll find out that they actually don't want to. So those are sort of just my thoughts on where you could direct me next if we want to keep exploring this.
Ms. Hennessy?
Thank you for this. And I think a gap in the past has been not really engaging with the elementary school. And I don't know if it's anyone's fault, just that's been a gap in what we've done. We've gotten so much feedback from high school students and parents in the past that this seemed like the right way to go. Although I would say that I love this just because it's, as you know, it's a movement forward in the right direction, but I don't think it should happen without more community engagement, particularly to hear from students and educators at all the levels. So I love it, but I don't think we should rush it. That to me would be problematic. But I think moving forward to find out what high school student, how does it impact, because I think things have changed at the high school with schedules and Smith courses, and then how, and middle school, yeah. So thank you, love it, but here we go.
Ms. Voss?
I'll echo that, and I appreciate Ms. Ginsburg's coming to share this experience, because I think there's been a long community-based discussion on this, and maybe we are in a position to do something. And I've heard from so many people that this is very important to them, to provide high school students with the opportunity to get a little more sleep. And without going into more detail, I think we really need to take that seriously. But I also echo, you wouldn't want to rush into that. And I think we do need to carve out time to figure this out, and to talk to the high school students and the teachers, because as I said at the last meeting, you can't make a decision in May or June and expect lives like daycare and internships to just line up with it. So I think I wasn't expecting necessarily the conversation to go this way tonight, but I think we need to make a commitment to talk to the people that are going to be most affected by this. And right now that feels to me like high school teachers and students, and figure out what makes sense now in 2019, but be willing to make this change if we hear that's the right thing. But we should be getting back to these people in the fall and saying the next year, so they have a whole year to plan if that's the way we go. So that's point one. And then I've been thinking about this a lot this week, and I just want to put a little twist to it, because what I was expecting tonight was to hear more controversy over the elementary level, and maybe we will, and I think that's an important thing for us. This doesn't take it away, this survey. I think there are some real questions. So I want to put out a potential amendment just to think about that has its share of problems. But what if we went forward and just left JFK and the elementary school as they are for the first year, and consider this maybe a trial at trying to move the high school to get students a little more sleep, but not touch the elementary schools? And if you did that, I think you could bus JFK the same way. You could bus the high school in between JFK and the elementary schools. Maybe it's 8-10. Somebody would have to look at that. And then the real issue becomes busing kids home, which is always the problem with the late start because of the shorter day at the elementary schools. And if you did that, you'd say maybe we just have a later bus at the high school. And so my new version of this says the elementary school families don't have to deal with this, and the people that have to deal with the change are the people that take the bus home at the end of the day at the high school. And my sense is that affects fewer people. Some of them won't like not having the bus available right after school, but some of them might actually like being able to stay after school, take advantage of what goes on at the high school, and still be able to get home. So that's just a brainstorm that I want to put out there for the community to think about. And it also meets the desire of not costing anything, I think.
Okay, so so we tasked the superintendent with surveying the elementary parents. So the next question becomes, do we want to continue that survey and ask other levels or not, or just ask the high school, or ask the middle school, or consider Ms. Voss's proposal? Yes.
I would like to try and reach as many parents as possible, and I feel like the open houses we have at the middle school and the high school are really well-attended events, and that if we could get a survey out at those, we would probably get a better response rate than the response rate we got at the elementary schools by having people get emails that they may or may not respond to.
And just to clarify, are you suggesting that for the elementary schools or for all 6 schools?
No, maybe actually redoing the elementary school will have some new students and a different cohort.
So
I mean,
all 6?
Yeah, yeah.
And that would be,
At the open houses.
okay, so not till the fall.
I think that makes the most sense, and then we could make a more informed decision.
Okay. Ms. Busansky.
I think it would be important to include teachers in the surveying, and so that might require doing an electronic survey.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman.
So I'll just add, I know that much of this discussion happened before I became part of the school committee, so I've been afraid to kind of dip my toe into this because I know how hard everybody worked and you look at all the different avenues and stuff, so I haven't done that yet. But this makes sense to me, certainly, and the idea of elementary school students starting later has been a concern to me just because of their sleep patterns, so the idea that Ms. Voss brought up actually just sounds so simple. I'm sure it got brought up before. There's got to be a downside to it, but I appreciate you coming up with a simple solution, and I'm certainly not against putting it out there, but delaying for another year. But I would ask that the survey that goes out has at least a small team of people with eyes on it. If it's a good opportunity to get input, then I think we need to ask the right sort of questions. And so with that said, this particular survey, I just want to remind people, we didn't ask people whether they favor this or not. It's not a do you favor it or not, and we'll go with the majority. We simply asked whether it's acceptable. So when you talk about whether it's acceptable, I think the people that say it's not acceptable carries more weight than if it was just a majority rules. So in both these cases, it's 30% of people just said it's not acceptable, and then when we said if finances are provided, 25% of parents said it's acceptable. So that's a pretty large number of people that are not saying, I just don't like it. They're saying it's not acceptable. So these are the kind of things that you then want to ask. Why isn't it acceptable? You want to differentiate really what they're getting at and getting at the heart of the matter. So surveying is a great idea. I would certainly offer my expertise and my assistance with you, John, to build something, or anybody else for that matter. But let's take advantage of really getting the most robust and accurate information that we can.
I'm sorry that I have one more question. The last email we got about special ed students and a late start, I would actually like to know a little bit more. I don't know how that, I've been doing a little research and getting some mixed results on that, but if that research is solid, then I think we shouldn't move forward in the elementary school. That shouldn't be an option, because that seems, so I'd like to know a little bit more if you could do that. That's putting more on your plate, but I don't want to go forward with it if the data shows that it's more harmful for the elementary school students.
Ms. Busansky.
So just to clarify, this is the email that Dr. Provost forwarded to us, the CPAC president, and the attached report, which I read. She's in my district, or in my ward, so she had emailed me first. And the report is really actually on a bigger issue, which is that school is not work-friendly at all. Parents who work, the schools do not work for them at all. They're not 9 to 5 days. We have snow days, we have professional development days, we have summer vacation, we have half days. So it's a much really bigger issue. It doesn't really get at the issue of, and that's not to say that the heart of what she's saying isn't accurate or true. It's just that the report didn't quite back that up. Maybe there's other research that's out there or available that would be good to know about.
Okay.
So I have a lot of notes, but I'm not sure what the motion is that I'm acting on.
Well, okay.
No, I was open to.
Well, it sounded like people were asking you to try to gather information from all levels of the district during the upcoming fall open house period with some form of survey, which maybe you could be shown maybe we maybe get a preview of it or something, possibly.
Okay.
And then, Ms. Voss, did you have something else to add?
I just wanted to reinforce that I think if we're going to vote to change start times of any of the schools, I'm interested what other people think, but I think we should have sort of a deadline in mind so people can know what to expect the following year, and maybe it's November 1st, I don't know if that's reasonable, but something well in advance when you're making decisions for the next year so you can plan around it.
When do we set the calendar, usually?
We are going to try to set the calendar in January next year. Typically, we do it in March.
Okay, so, but certainly before then, so, okay.
Have
Yes,
we,
ma'am.
have we addressed whether or not that extra half hour at the end of the day would affect athletics? Or
Well, part of the reason that I had come forward and said, if, in response to the question of, is there a plan that we could possibly pursue? The reason I said the half an hour bump plan fits in with some other things is, at the time that we were achieving a late start by eliminating high school transportation, it was going to be a half an hour, because that is reasonable for student athletes. They still miss more instruction than they do now, but it was not really felt to be an unacceptable loss.
Okay, I was
The more
just
you-
thinking
the
if
more
we
you
have to
put it back,
change
the more it will affect
schedules.
student.
Right, I was just thinking if they're making athletic schedules, I don't know how far in advance they would make those.
So the assumption is that our high school day would not affect student athletic
Okay.
schedules.
Okay,
The real impact is the later we start, the more student athletes will miss of their last period, especially for away games.
okay, thank you.
At home games, it's not so much of an issue, but.
Okay.
And I know we discussed this in the last time, would virtual Y be able to cover that extra half an hour? We talked about, would parents maybe still be able to, who use virtual Y at the elementary level, still be able to drop their kids off and stay longer?
I haven't had the conversation with them yet. My suspicion is they may run into a capacity issue. My thought is if we were going to do something like this, we would probably look more to a Leeds model than expecting the Y to be able to take all of the students.
Mr. Moore?
That's another reason to maybe figure this out in the fall, so everybody has plenty of time to plan accordingly.
Mr. Moore?
Yeah, I just want to, I'm not sure where this is going to be going in terms of an actual proposal, but I just really want to comment about how our existing schedule, was not the result of asking anybody if it would be acceptable to them or not. And I think it's probably remarkable if a schedule that was based pretty much just on splitting up the one tier of buses into three happened to be perfect both for everybody's schedules, all the families in Northampton, as well as developmentally appropriate for the various age groups and things. In fact, I think it probably isn't either of those, and so I really I'm a little bit. I understand sort of some of the basis for doing polling, but in the end, you probably ask if the current schedule is acceptable, and you'd probably find a number of people who said it wasn't. And I really wonder if this is where I don't know, it's like a zero-based budgeting kind of an idea, which is really impractical in practice, but is alluring in theory. If you just started with saying, look, what are the things you're trying to do with the schedule, and started at the beginning and sort of said, developmentally what makes the most sense. And I think the research shows pretty much a break at the age of 12 or something when the sleep thing starts to affect people's health. Which is not exactly where our schools break, right? Our schools break closer to 11. And looked at that and sort of said, well, what schedule would you make? And then to the point in that research about, being more sort of job friendly, because that is a really important value. So many people are so glad when their kids can finally go to school because at least they get 6 hours of coverage. What would happen if you just tried to make a schedule from the ground up based on, as opposed to making it based off of either, what we've just been doing for the last 30 years, or based off of, how can we squeeze the buses? If you made it from, sort of for educational reasons and for social reasons involving things like, accommodating the fact that lots of people, parents, work during the daytime. and try to do a thing like that and just sort of see what that product looked like, as opposed to, this other way of sort of working back from here. I mean, the only reason that this current schedule works is because lots and lots of people go through all sorts of contortions to make it work. And so that's where the cost of the current one is. It's invisible to us on our budget. If we do the same schedule year after year, it costs us nothing. But there's huge costs in the community of people who are doing things to make it work. And, and just because we might have a change that might cost us something, might cost the community more, might cost the community less, we wouldn't really know. And that's maybe where the surveys would let us know that sort of thing. But it seems like it's not worth asking either us or the community to possibly incur those kinds of costs, unless there's actually a sort of a benefit in terms of being developmentally appropriate, or hopefully alleviating some of the costs on the community by having, some sort of a way to provide coverage sort of from, the 8:30 to 5:30 range, which is what it would need to do. Anyway, so I'm sure it's not really a proposal, but as I think some of the committee, if we're going to delve into this, it's like we keep going around the edges. I know, because I've been here, we've been around the edges before. The rationale for making an upheaval isn't enough if it's just around the edges. Or at least it hasn't been enough in the past, I should say.
Okay. So, Doc.
Can I just say one thing? I think there is a difference right now. There's the proposal that came, there's the proposal that I made that may not be better, it's just a brainstorm. And there's, I think, the committee saying we want to make a decision by sometime in the fall based on a little more information, and we just need feedback from the people this is going to affect the most. But I think this is actually, to me, closer to actually solving this without costing money than we've been, and that's a really good thing. And
Okay, so Dr. Provost, do you feel you have sufficient feedback on this?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now we'll go to the your next presentation, which is the non-academic measures.
Yes, and so this is our final student success meeting for the year. I passed out the protocol that we use so that you can just kind of remind yourself of where we are. And as you know, my goal in this is not to say too much, but just to facilitate. So I don't have my clicker, but Annie, if you would advance. We're going to be looking at two things, two non-academics. This is our non-academic meeting of the year. Student attendance and student discipline, obviously connected to each other because some student attendance issues are school mandated attendance issues given in the form of suspensions. So know that these two variables are highly correlated in that way, and also know that these are really important enablers of learning. If you don't have students present, it really doesn't matter what we do with our curriculum and instruction or the learning materials we make available to students. And if they are not present because we've kicked them out, once again, it doesn't really matter what we do to improve our instruction. It's not likely to lead to better student outcomes. So that's why these two are on for this meeting. And the other thing I would throw out is you are looking at last year's data. So this is data that's almost 365 days old at this point. This is not current year data. Okay, you would just continue. So the first charts are just looking at attendance rates. The attendance rate is the percent of students who are actually in school on average. You can see each of the schools in the state. You can go ahead. Then we look at the rates disaggregated by student subgroup. Okay. You can keep going. Okay. You can go a little slower. Okay. And so the next, we're looking at the average number of days absent. That's different than the attendance rate per se, because that is looking at the students as a entire cohort, and this is looking at students as individuals and then averaging the number of days absent they have. So for all students, statewide average is 9.5 days, or was 9.5 days in 2018, and you can see where our schools are. This is all students. This is economically disadvantaged. This is English language learners, students with disabilities, Hispanic or Latino, multiracial, non-Hispanic, and white. Next is the percentage of students absent 10 or more days in the school year. Tracked because it's a time when learning problems really start to show up as a result of absenteeism. And then we get to chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is defined as being absent 10% of the days in membership. So for a student who's enrolled all year, that would be more than 18 days. For a student who is enrolled for one semester, it would be more than 9 days. This is the highest category of risk in terms of absenteeism. Okay, and then the second step is student discipline. Go ahead, Amy. And so there are all kinds of negative correlates with discipline, including poor academic achievement, in-grade retention, delinquency, dropping out, disaffection and alienation, and even drug use. That just, by the way, some of those issues show up in some of the states that have gone to 4-day weeks in order to try to save money. One of the things that's been sort of a universal experience is crime rate goes up because you have students out in the neighborhood unsupervised. That's one of the things kids do when they're being suspended from school. Okay, so this is the in-school suspension rate, and you can see this is the whole district. This is not by school, but it is disaggregated by student subgroup. The blue bars show the suspension rate for Northampton Public School students. The red bars show the suspension rate for Massachusetts students. In Northampton, the blue bars are essentially representing the middle school and high school because there's very little in-school or out-of-school suspension at the elementaries. And this is out-of-school suspension. And then the next question, or the next figure we look at are the days missed due to suspension. This is a way of measuring whether they're long-term or short-term. And again, blue is NPS, red is Massachusetts. And these are percentages. And here are the different subgroups coming up. Okay, so moving on, we're now at number 2 on the protocol, describing the data. This is your time to describe what you see without trying to interpret or analyze or make judgments about the data. Just saying, what do you see in the charts? And we'll take about 10 minutes for this.
Can I ask a question that's just how we look at them? At this point, is that okay? there's that line for the state average on many of them. And my question is, how does that line change between elementary? You could pick any of them, right? Like, going back to the earlier ones,
Yeah.
that's just a state average across K through 12. And you might notice that high school often exceeds it, but how does the state average move for those different things? Do we know?
I don't know. That's not disaggregated by grade level at the state level.
Okay. I'll start with an observation. The high school has higher values in most of these measures. You can pick your measure, and the high school tends to exceed the state average.
This is a lot to look at, both mixing attendance and discipline, but so sticking with attendance for now, it does look, on my first look, that Jackson Street seems to be doing something a little bit more exceptional, a little bit more effective, or, okay.
Now you're getting into number
You're
two.
right, you're right. Jackson Street's data is lower than the other, overall better than the other district, than the other schools in the district. How's that?
That's good.
All right, thank you. Trying to role model this.
Lower is probably better than better because better has a judgment implicit. in it.
Well, okay, well, that's a little too picky.
Ms. Fallon?
That when you look at the first set of slides up to slide 11, our numbers actually look pretty good. They're very close or exceed the state average as far as attendance. And I'm assuming that's because you have students who are not missing school at all. And so when you average that with students with the chronic absenteeism, that it kind of brings it.
You're getting way into an
Okay.
analysis.
Okay, so anyway, it looks pretty good for the first set of slides.
There you go.
The second slides, the second set of slides, when you break it into subgroups, becomes a little more troubling. For example, the average number of absences for economically disadvantaged at the high school exceeds the state average. Also for English language learners at Bridge Street School and the high school exceeds the average, and at JFK. And the number of absences for students with disabilities exceeds the state average in a fairly significant way, as does the number of absences for Hispanic or Latino at the high school. So.
Ms. Hennessy?
The chronically absent is concerning, our numbers, and I agree with Mr. Kaufman, Jackson Street, just look at Jackson Street, because they're delivering something well. And I have a question. I'm assuming, am I right to assume that days absent, we do not include suspensions as a day absent?
No, that's still a day absent.
It does count.
If it's an out-of-school suspension. If it's an in-school suspension, then you're present.
Thank you.
It just made me wonder about the size of the subgroups, but I guess we don't know that. So just wondering if we're talking about a pretty small size at some of the elementary schools of different subgroups that might cause something to look proportionately larger or smaller when there's really sort of an underlying reason that we know. But
Well, I think you can safely say that all of the subgroups are smaller at the elementaries than they are at JFK in the middle. I mean JFK in high school. So they have, a small difference can have a bigger shift at the elementary than at middle or high school. Laura?
Ms. Fallon?
At Bridge Street, the number of students who are absent 10 or more days exceeds the state average and is approaching 40%.
Yeah, just an observation again, there just seems to be wide variation. Just I think dovetails a little bit with what Ms. Pazanski said. They're sensitive to how many numbers there are there, but overall, looking at this, there's a lot of variation amongst our elementary schools and certainly with our elementary compared to our secondary schools and our two secondary schools. So overall, there's a lot of variation here. Something's going on.
Can I ask another question? So I'm going to go back to that same topic. So Jackson and Leeds are our two largest schools. Is that true?
Two largest
Elementary, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
So I know where I teach, one student we needed to get one more student in for those days this week, MCAS. that have brought us up to the nine, you know what I mean? Like, we were looking,
Yeah.
we're phoning one, so it seems like the smaller schools, it's really is small numbers. Is that true? You've seen that?
Depending on the subgroups. So when I look at the elementary schools, then I rely more upon the all students than looking at subgroups because,
Okay.
you know, when you've got a couple hundred students, that's enough of a group for me.
It just seems, I'm complimenting Jackson, and indeed they're doing really well, but if it's really about one additional student, then this kind of history, you know, the graph looks worse.
So on page 29, to Ms. Hennessy's point, I think that may highlight, the graph on page 29 shows one of the primary concerns that you had mentioned, Dr. Provost, chronically absent, and those are entire schools. So that, I think, demonstrates some important variation, which don't go away in looking in the subgroups, but they're more sensitive to the small sample set, small population sets.
Ms. Fallon?
On slide 23, for absent 10 or more days for English language learners, I noticed that the state average is high, and we are significantly past the state average at 4 schools. So when I see us approaching 70% of our English language learners are missing more than 10 days of school, that concerns me.
All right, so should we move to analysis? This is.
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
So on page 31, boy, that chronically absent percentage of page 31, the percent of LEP or English language learning students at Bridge Street and JFK are extraordinarily high, very concerning.
Okay, so now we'll move into analysis. So question here is, now that you've described what you've seen, what does it suggest? And what can we assume about students and their learning?
Just on attendance now?
Attendance or discipline? We've got both of them up there.
Okay.
Well, for me, do you mind?
Yep.
Bridge Street last year came to my mind when I was looking at the data. So I think that perhaps had an impact on attendance, clearly. I wonder, I'm going to continue?
Sure.
I wonder, since our high school, actually with our attendance, it doesn't seem so great. And yet I look at, we have so many students taking AP exams, I wonder how the attendance falls at the end of the year, if that brings our averages down or up.
I can tell you, I mean, not that you'd be able to tell from this data, but one of the things I do is print out monthly attendance data for building level leaders. And we're looking basically at the same number. We're looking at whatever 10% happens to be at that point in time. And usually by the end of September, the high school list is multiple pages.
Okay.
It's only 2 days at the end of September, but still, it's, you know, proportionally, they're on track to have a lot of chronic absenteeism.
So the data, thank you. Thought he was calling. Are you facilitating?
Whatever.
Whatever, okay, thanks. So what does the data suggest? Thank you for pointing out this is 2018. I was overthinking. So in 2018, and I think underlining this is that we owe it to everybody to kind of look at and see whether this is a single year or whether this is a trend. But that said, there are a number of major concerns here. I think that's all I'll suggest. There's a number of major concerns at each of the schools by population, and I'll just add, because we haven't talked about student discipline, but this suggests that even if we compare ourselves to the Massachusetts average, which is what this exercise is doing, what's the word you
I'm
used?
sorry, I said horrible.
Horrible, yeah, this is shocking. Yeah, this is really, really surprising. It suggests this is surprising, how's that?
Ms. Voss and then Ms.
Can't follow my own rules.
I'm just going to go back to the comparison to the high school and what appears to be well above state average and right in all of those charts. And I think my interpretation is it seems pretty likely that absenteeism in a high school student on average is probably different from absenteeism in an elementary kid. One example might be you can leave your high school kid home alone and you can't leave your elementary. I don't know if that's the reason, but I'm not sure we should interpret these data as there's something different or worse about the absenteeism at our high school compared to other high schools. Maybe everybody's district has the same trend.
Ms. Fallon.
So I was questioning, our numbers for in-school suspension rate are significantly higher than the state average, but it would appear that that's partly because we're choosing to in-school suspension over out-of-school suspension in a majority of the cases. Is that a
I'd say
correct
that's supported
assumption?
by the
Yeah.
two charts in comparison to each other.
And so then I guess it's a question that relates back to the code of conduct as far as how those decisions are being made, and what could be done differently, I suppose. Yeah, because those numbers are a little bit concerning.
Ms. Hennessy.
I'm very concerned about the African-American Black student out-of-school suspension and Hispanic student, particularly the African-American Black student suspension in and out. It's just glaring, and it speaks to me of both, just some needs we need to address.
Is that slide, you were looking at like slide
I was looking at 39.
And then also if you go to the days missed one.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like twice
Yeah.
or 3 times any kind of control group.
Just stepping out of facilitation for a second, this is why I highlighted PBIS and the revisions to the code of conduct in my welcome back letter as 2 of the really important things that need to happen this year. Remember, this is 2 years ago, so I think we'll find that this year's data is much better. I think we're going to find that the numbers are lower all across the board. What I don't think we'll find that we've resolved yet is the disproportionality between different groups. So I think everyone will be lower, but I think the peaks will still be on the same groups. So some progress I think will be seen, but more work to be done. So, sorry, that wasn't a facilitation.
No,
I just
sure.
wanted
Thank
to
you.
speak to that.
Ms. Fallon.
I guess it's just important for us to know when we're looking at this data and the high school numbers seem higher for absenteeism, what's considered an absence. Because if it's a long block, they could technically be attending more than half of their classes and still not get credit for the day. What's the cutoff for even being considered an absence? Like if they miss the first period or if they leave after lunch, like what is considered an absence technically? Is it more than half of the day?
That is a great question, which I don't know, to be honest with you. And partial day attendance, there must be a cut point somewhere. I can look into that. and
Is
get
it
back to you.
MIAA, don't they say? Half a day is.
MIAA, that is the rule for MIAA, but I'm not sure if the
No,
state follows the same rule.
So you could always use the proms on the 10-3 period.
Yeah.
Ms. Voss.
Thanks. So going back to the discipline plots, if we look at, I guess it's number 38, the in-school, Northampton has across the board more in-school. And if we go to the next slide, 39, we seem to have a little bit less, other than the one exception we already spoke about, of out of school, which is good if you are hoping your students are supervised and, around adults that are hopefully, or helping them to understand what needs to happen. So my question about those two is, what is our suspension rate overall, whether it's in school or out of school? And if you look ahead a couple more slides to 41, is this a measure of that? Are we suspending kids more than the average? And is that what we're seeing there? Is this including both in school suspension and out of school suspension? Is that the right conclusion to draw from that? That
Yes, this
we
combines
have
both
worse
in school and
suspensions in our district than the state average? And I guess my question is, do we have a sense of why that would be?
Well, I think the only conclusion that you can reach is that we're suspending students at higher rates than schools are on average across the Commonwealth, or were in 2018.
Yeah.
That may not be the case when we get the data in for 2019.
I guess I wonder what about, to what degree JFK is kind of conflict resolution or restorative justice work that I always kind of hear about, I never see any numbers on, plays a role in when a kid is, gets an in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension. I don't know that we do anything like that at the high school. And then I just want to add to that, I found it really concerning the parent who spoke in public comment. And I've been hearing this report out of 6th grade parents now about kids getting hurt in what seems to be, possibly bullying situations. And so where does that fall into this? Like, who's not? I mean, I realize this is a discipline report, but where's the report of, I don't know, some bigger report on what's happening in our schools in terms of not just in-school, out-of-school suspension, but kids being sat down and working on issues and trying to come up with some alternative resolutions. And I know that probably feeds into the code of conduct work, but I just think it's really important to pay attention to that too.
Well, I think it feeds most directly into the PBIS data. I didn't provide the PBIS data here because JFK is really the only school that has that, and I wanted to give a district-wide snapshot. But when we do this next year, if we still pick these two variables, I could show you the PBIS data, and then you get more of a fine-grained look just at that one school, not at the whole district, not compared to anything, but you would be able to see that.
Ms. Fallon?
When you look at slides 38 and 39 of the in-school suspension rates for the whole district, we've already spoken to the elevated numbers for African American and Black, but students with disabilities really stands out, and I have to wonder how we're supporting them and what we're making available to get students through the day, what we're doing to avoid escalation, and whether providing enough space and quiet time and support for things to not escalate to the level of a suspension. So that's what stands out to me for both.
I guess same graph, I have a question about the data, which is if you as an individual are part of this data, just you have an in-school suspension rate, so your point is here, and you have 1 in-school suspension versus 10 in-school suspensions for that year. I don't think that's reflected here, right? So is that true?
That's not reflected there. That's reflected on the following charts. When you look at the total number of days absent.
Thank you. Yes.
Days of instruction
So,
due to discipline.
So, okay, that's really helpful. So, I'm just kind of describing this chart out loud because I hadn't digested it yet, but I guess, so I'm kind of doing 2 if that's okay. But a good thing about this chart is greater than 10 days, we are smaller than the state average. So if we're trying to digest this data, it's actually good to have your blue bar high on this chart at 1 day, because that shows that you just had 1 discipline event. Okay, that's good.
Okay, so let's move on to the next stage, which is implications. And this has implications for classroom practice, but it really would be, for this group, implications for the district's practice.
Ms. Hennessy?
So two things that came to my mind were thinking about trauma-focused schools and really having PD, I know teachers have spoken with me about this too, around trauma and how to create schools that are really sensitive to that, and then also having a more diverse professional staff.
I would just commend you again on taking on the code of conduct. This is certainly, I think these data just really very clearly state that we need to step back, look at the data, and see what we're doing in terms of our rules, how we're disciplining kids, and everything that you pointed out in the Syracuse model. I bet you have some evidence of having some impact on these, so kudos, and I think I would love to hear some updates on what's happening with that at some point, and let's make sure that we look at this disciplinary data again and again to make sure that if that's not working, maybe something else is, but it might take a series of things. But this certainly, for me, it just reinforces the fact that we made a very smart decision around that.
Ms. Fallon?
I hope that at some point you can update us on, I know that the ALPS program was developed at the high school, the alternative learning program, and what the plan is moving forward to replace that with to support students who are struggling the most.
Yes, I hope to have something to report on that soon. I'm meeting with the high school administration every Thursday morning, have been for about 2 months now, maybe a little bit longer. And they are looking at a redesign, not only of that program, but sort of the program is more intense than that, because we do have a program here that is for students who are present with behavioral challenges that are too intense for even what was formerly known as the ALP.
So I'd also ask you to look into why Jackson Street is having the successes they are, and I think it's worth considering principals and leadership teams at the other schools to look at their data and maybe reflect on why they're having such challenges, whether it's a resource, an approach, a strategy. Maybe the success at Jackson Street could certainly be shared with the other schools, but some of this is rather undeniable. Second to that, I'll add that I don't think the state average is something to shoot for. I think the state average is just a pretty bleak number in and of itself, and I do think Northampton has more resources, less challenges than many of the other districts do in terms of getting their kids to school, so I wouldn't shoot for a state average, and I would advocate for you, Dr. Provost, to come up with a target that we want to reach, or maybe lead a discussion for us as a committee to come up with a more bold target for what we want for not all these indicators, but there's a few key ones here that we can shoot for, and make sure that we concentrate on that, and again, talk about resources, strategies, and whatever support the schools need to get the kids here, because clearly there's hardly anything more important than getting the kids to school, and the state average is nice, indicator to compare ourselves to, but I would shoot for much higher than that. I would shoot for far reduced chronic absences and much higher attendance rates, and other schools have achieved that. So I think if we make a really strong statement and a strong approach to that beginning in the fall, that would be the latest I would like to see us really concentrate on redoing this. Some of this stuff is really concerning.
Ms. Fox?
So, thank you for all of this. A suggestion I would make for the next time we see data like these would be, for our data where we know it, add a standard deviation bar to it. So for example, and I think Ms. Fallon was getting to this earlier, I mean, you can put up perhaps chart 5 if you don't mind. you know, if we look at this and there's other ones that have bigger differences and you say Jackson Street's doing something really well there, but if they had a standard deviation that was much, much bigger than another school, you might draw a really different conclusion from that. And we have those data and those are easy to just add on to these. And then we can see which of our schools, if it's a really, you know, if the standard deviation is small, that means almost all kids are achieving this. And if it's big, you have that population, you want to figure out who they are and what you can do. And I think we have more data that we could access here. And I understand probably we don't have it at the state level. I wish they would put that there too. Maybe we could ask them to.
It's more of a question. I'm curious when I'm looking at the elementary schools about, because I'm, you know, familiar with Jackson and Leeds a little bit more, but there are a lot of walkers at Jackson. Like the walker to bus percentages seem like that could have an effect on this, and how, so that's my question.
I really don't know what the impact of walking versus busing on attendance is. One thing that no one's mentioned that I do know has a big impact is the presence of preschool. So that is something that disadvantages both Bridge and Leeds on any of the indicators of attendance.
Because the preschool's being counted?
Preschool is counted.
Okay.
And little kids get sick a lot, they miss a lot of days.
I'm curious about that, though, Dr. Provost. I mean, yeah, so.
Just to add to that, I wonder if, for our data, if we're trying to compare over the 4 elementary schools, if we want to eliminate, if we can, eliminate the preschool data when we show this, just so it's comparing apples to apples.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Well, there's one more step. Do you want to skip it, or do you want to do it?
Can I throw out one more quick suggestion that since we'll be embarking on a new district improvement plan, that this would be a very worthwhile, both of these avenues might provide a great target or goal for us to set in both discipline and attendance for a 5-year span, however long our next district improvement plan is.
Okay. So do you want to do step 5, or do you want to just call it quits?
What's step 5, John?
What is step 5?
Step 5 is the reflections, the things you learned by listening to your peers, things that you might have picked up through my comments that weren't immediately obvious to you when you got your packet.
I feel like we did it a little bit as we went. Maybe we didn't separate it, but that's just that.
All right.
I think this raises a lot of questions. We don't have answers per se, and that's fine, but I do think that many of these questions, it would be helpful to the extent that you're able to respond to them in the time that you have. But at some point, if you can respond to some of these questions, like pulling out the preschool data and stuff, I think it would be the next step in helping us.
Sure.
That'd be great. Is it possible for you to give your overview on why you presented us these data and how you feel about them, and what, can you give us a quick summary, John?
Sure. Really, one of the reasons that I chose these non-academic indicators out of a group of probably 20 or 30 non-academic indicators that we do keep data on is that I currently am reading the Burke and Schneider work on reorganizing Chicago public schools for reform, and one of the variables that came out in their model that differentiated schools that improved from schools that didn't improve was student attendance. And so that drew me to that first. And then that is connected clearly to student discipline, because some of the absences that students have are absences that we require them to have when we kick them out of school. So that was the reason for those 2 variables.
So what do you think when you look at these data?
I had a number of concerns about them when we actually did see some of this stuff at the end of last year, which is sort of my tipping of my hat to you that I was going down the student discipline path this year with PBIS at JFK and also the code of conduct. My concern was twofold in the discipline area, just the magnitude of it across the board, especially within school suspension, was larger than it ought to be when you look at statewide average, whether or not that's a worthy goal. We're not meeting that. But also the disproportionality, because that had come right at the end of our year-long effort in anti-bias. So that felt really bad. So I do think that the data will look different at the end of 2019. I do think there's a lot of work that's been done, and since this is really reflective of, the discipline data is really reflective only of JFK and the high school, and JFK has made substantial changes to their practice, I think you'll see a big difference.
Sure.
But I felt that was really something that we needed to take head on, because it was an indicator of something that wasn't really right in our district, that we don't really talk about directly, but we could have the conversation through the data, I thought.
Mhm. Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
Sorry.
Welcome back, Coach.
Thanks.
So, we have some future business and meeting dates. The next school committee meeting is scheduled at the JFK Community Room on Thursday, June 13th, 2019, I believe. And then a school committee meeting on Monday, July 8th, 2019, at 6:45 p.m. in the JFK Community Room. We next have a request for an executive session.
I wanted to make an announcement, but I was late.
Okay. Mr. Zahowski wants, I guess he was unable to be here during the announcements portion, so would his colleagues allow him to make an announcement now?
Sure.
Thank you. That's bright light there. Can we shut that projector?
Oh, yeah.
Or-
Any chance we can? He's got the projector.
Thank you. Sorry for being late this evening, but during the announcement period, I wanted to make an announcement. I'd like to inform the public that after 12 years as the Ward 4 School Committee representative, this will be my last term. I've decided not to seek re-election this November. On some reflection, at the age of 48, I've come to realize that I've served the city of Northampton as an elected official for 25% of my life, and I think it's time now for me to move on. I'm grateful for the opportunity I've had to participate in local government and help Northampton School District over the last decade. I'm humbled by the great people of Ward 4 who voted me into office for these last 4 terms, and I thank them for trusting me to represent them and their children at this table. It's been an honor. I'm sure as the year comes to an end and I have a few thoughts to share, I will do that. But for now, I would simply ask anyone who might be interested in serving as the next Ward 4 representative to seriously give it some consideration and get involved in this most important public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zahowski. So, the next item on the agenda is a request for an executive session. Would someone like to please make that motion? I would suggest someone who can vote for that motion, or part of that motion. So, Ms. Fallon?
I'd like to make a motion, request for an executive session under Massachusetts General Law, Open Meeting Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Northampton Association of School Employees, whereas an open session would have a detrimental effect and further details would compromise the reason for going into executive session.
There's a second. Okay. I would ask the clerk to call the roll. That requires a roll call vote. Those voting in the affirmative would vote to go into executive session.
Ms. Laura Fallon?
Yes.
Ms.
Suzanne Hennessy.
Yes.
Mr. Lonnie Kaufman.
Yes.
Mr. Howard Moore.
Yes.
Ms. Susan Boss.
Yes.
Mr. Ed Zahowski.
Yes.
Mayor David Narcoitz.
Yes.
And Ms. Rebecca Busansky.
Yes.
Okay. So I would just inform the public that we are now moving into executive session because to have this conversation in open session would compromise the committee's negotiating position. I would also let the public know that we will adjourn from executive session. We will not return to open session. Thank you very much.